the second witness. We have Mr. Chris Sidoti, who is an international human rights expert and founding member of Special Advisory Council for Myanmar. He has been a member of the UN Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Myanmar, and this fact-finding mission has released 3 reports across 2018 and 2019, exposing widespread human rights violations, including systematic gender-based and sexual violence by the Myanmar military against ethnic minorities, and he's also exposed Tatmadar's business interests. So I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Chris Sidoti. So the floor is yours. Welcome to our inquiry.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good evening to you and to all the members of the inquiry, and indeed good evening to all those who are watching in from many parts of the planet. The Special Advisory Council for Myanmar was established in February last year, soon after the commencement of the coup. We had 2 objectives in setting up SACM. The first was to encourage the democracy movement in Myanmar, and the second was to place pressure on the military junta as it was seeking to take control of the country, an attempt on its part that has become increasingly difficult as the last 18 months, year and a half, has gone on. In looking at these 2 objectives, we were very conscious of the way in which the international system had failed the people of Myanmar. In those early days of the coup, it was exciting for me as an international lawyer to see thousands of young people marching in the streets of the cities of Myanmar, carrying signs with R2P on, responsibility to protect, a fairly esoteric concept in United Nations language, but clearly known to the young people of Myanmar, who were calling on us outsiders to do something to support them in their attempt to establish a democratic system in their country. I mean, bear in mind that at that stage, Myanmar had been under essentially military rule for 60 years, apart from the coalition government period with the National League for Democracy since 2015. So it was a long period of military rule, and young people in particular, but the people of Myanmar generally, were no longer prepared to tolerate the military, let alone contemplate a return to the total control that the military had exercised up to 2010. So R2P, they sought, responsibility to protect, the fact that the international system would live up to the promises that it had made. But of course it failed. It failed dismally. For us at the Special Advisory Council for Myanmar, encouraging the democracy movement in the face of the failure of the international system was one of our principal objectives, and allied to that, placing pressure on the military. We identified 3 strategies to pursue in seeking those objectives. We called it the 3 cuts strategies: cut the arms, cut the cash, and cut impunity. Cut the arms supply so that the military would no longer be able to wage war as it had in the past. Cut the cash so that, first, the enrichment of the senior military leadership would end, and second, the capacity of the military to finance its operations would be limited and ultimately eliminated. And then the third cut impunity. At long last, holding those responsible for the grave human rights atrocities in Myanmar to account for their actions. The fact-finding mission established by the Human Rights Council, of which, as you recalled, I was a member, saw impunity as lying at the heart of the Myanmar tragedy. The military had been conducting the same kind of operations for decades and getting away with it because they had never been held to account. Successive military leaders learned from each other and passed on the same tactics. And it has been very much the same tactics. So we said back in 2018, until such time as the military leadership is held to account, we will see a repetition of all of the patterns of conduct of the last 50 years. And tragically, that's what we have seen, particularly again since February 2021. I know tonight you're looking particularly at this question of sanctions or international economic engagement with the military. And so I'd like to focus my comments particularly on that issue. This is the second cut that we referred to, cut the cash. Myanmar's economy has always been highly militarised. The first form of military dictatorship in 1962 was a form of military socialism, where the entire country was under the economic control of the military. There was very little private economic activity, and the military sought to be the principal economic actor. That policy persisted for 30 years until 1990. And at that stage, the military started to open up the economy. The process was speeded up in the early 2000s. I don't think that was part of a commitment by the military to withdraw from the kind of money-making activities that it had been involved in the past. Rather, I see it as an attempt by the military to make itself even richer. Its attitude seems to me to have been that by increasing the size of the pie, the military could get more cash out of the pie, even if the share that it actually held was smaller than in the past. So the strategy of pursuing a more diversified economy, of enabling the growth of a much larger private sector, and in particular, seeking foreign investment, was part of the strategy of increasing the size of the pie so that the military's cut could get bigger too. Even in 2021, as the military launched its coup, even after 20 years of opening up and diversification, Myanmar's economy was still heavily militarised. The military conducted its activities, its economic activities, through a number of forms. As Tom Andrews, the Special Rapporteur, has mentioned, the fact-finding mission produced a major report in 2019 on the economic interests of the Myanmar military. We identified its two principal holding companies, conglomerates, Myanmar Economic Holdings Limited and Myanmar Economic Corporation. We identified dozens of subsidiaries of those two conglomerates and a very large number of other companies through which the military operated and made money. And as I mentioned already, the purpose of doing this was both to fund military operations and to enrich the military leadership. The fact-finding mission called for economic disengagement from the Myanmar military. And when we made that call in 2019, there was very little response to it. I guess it's a matter that all things take time. Certainly in 2021, after the military launched its coup, we saw renewed interest in the findings of the fact-finding mission from 2019 and responses from many states, but also from many private businesses to the analysis that we then presented, and on their part, a commitment to disengaging with the military. Tom has already referred to the actions taken by many states to impose economic sanctions on the military. Many states, but not all, and certainly not the United Nations itself. The purpose of cutting the cash is to address those two outcomes, results of economic activity. It's to reduce the military's capacity to conduct armed operations and to dry up the supply of money that has enriched the generals for decades. In looking at the way the military engages in the Myanmar economy, we can only understand it as a classic rent-seeking operation. The military is not a productive force. It's not engaged in any way in investing and earning income from hard labour. It's rent-seeking in the sense that it seeks to do nothing and to make money from the investment and the labour of others. The people of Myanmar, the money of Myanmar business people, and the money of international investors. And so the military confiscates land, and then rents the land to foreign investors, generally in joint venture operations, for shopping plazas and hotels and ports and other forms of development. The military provides nothing but the land, and the land has been stolen from farmers and peasants and others who previously owned it. So it's classic rent-seeking operations. The sanctions that have been imposed since February 2021 have been long overdue. It should have been done a long time ago, but better late than never. We at the Special Advisory Council for Myanmar have been very pleased at the actions taken by many states, the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and many others. Not, I'm afraid to say, I'm ashamed to say, my own country, Australia, not Japan, not the Republic of Korea, not ASEAN states. There is still much room for action in this region to address the crisis in Myanmar. And we have seen far too great reluctance on the part of other regional states to join the actions of North America and Europe in addressing the economic power of the military. It's certainly true to say that sanctions are a very slow-moving strategy. They don't produce results overnight. Sometimes we become impatient and we worry whether sanctions are working. But certainly the evidence is there that sanctions are contributing to those two objectives I stated at the beginning. Because they are significant international actions, they provide encouragement to the democratic movement. The democratic movement sees the international system as responding, albeit in a limited way, through the imposition of sanctions. And they certainly place pressure on the military, both at a symbolic level and at the level of cutting the cash supply that in time stifles military's capacity to enrich itself and to arm itself. The fact-finding mission's report in 2019 certainly provided a first mapping of where the money is coming from. But we were unsuccessful in indicating where the money was going to. And this is an area where much more research needs to be done. And I would say particularly much more responsibility exercised by ASEAN states. The military is hiding its ill-gotten gains somewhere. There are suspicions that it's in Singapore, a lot of it, perhaps in Hong Kong. There are suspicions that the military has got it stashed away even in some Western European bank accounts. Following the money trail is the next part of the task of cutting the cash. And this has barely begun at this stage. We certainly in the fact-finding mission came up against brick walls, laws of secrecy relating to banking. Yet why should this corrupt, illegitimate military force be entitled to the protection of secrecy laws when it comes to banking their ill-gotten gains? There is no legal or moral justification for this. So one thing I would suggest to your inquiry is that it place emphasis on following the money flow out, not just in, but out, and working out where the cash is stashed and placing pressure, particularly on ASEAN states, as I have said, to disclose the banking interest of the Myanmar generals in their own countries. I think, Madam Chair, that's enough by way of introduction. And as in relation to the Special Rapporteur, I'd be very happy to respond to your comments and your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was extremely useful, and indeed on the economic interests and how of the junta and how we can address them. On your sort of key suggestion that we should place emphasis on following the money trail where the cash is actually stashed. So the question here is that it takes a lot of research and work Are you aware of any sort of, let's say, international journalists associations or groups that are doing this? Because we have seen how extremely influential such projects by international journalists groups have been lately on sort of putting a stop on the secrecy of financial institutions and money laundering and so perhaps you can make a few more suggestions on how that could actually be done. And do you have some hints on you mentioned Singapore, you mentioned Hong Kong, anything particular on those places? And of course, I took note of what you said, that there's a possibility that some of the cash would be in Western European banks. So that would be my question to you, and then I open for colleagues.
Thank you. Firstly, the investigative journalists. I certainly know of some enormously important and very difficult investigative work done by journalists into foreign investment in Myanmar, but I don't know of any that have been following the cash trail. The best investigations on that have tended to be the mega investigations that have relied upon the release of documents in tax havens. But I don't know of any work that has been done to date that is looking at the investments of Myanmar generals in bank accounts or elsewhere. So I'm afraid no. But yes, I've been very impressed with the work that has been done by investigative journalists in the past. And I hope there are some that are ploughing away in this field to try to get the answers. Hong Kong, Singapore, Western Europe. I'm just reporting to you rumours that go round. When we asked people at the fact-finding mission days where the money was stashed, these were the suggestions that were made. I don't know that we spoke with anybody who had actual direct evidence, I'm afraid. We do know from the work that we did on investing in Myanmar that there is a lot of financial relationship between companies in Singapore and also in Hong Kong. So this is known. But whether the generals are actually banking there or not has been totally opaque to date, I'm afraid.
Thanks. As a follow-up, perhaps a question about sanctions. We know that quite a lot has been done in terms of 41 countries, as Tom Andrews mentioned, have some restrictive measures in place. But what is your view on the effectiveness of these sanctions, and what more could be done there?
As I mentioned, the sanction regimes always take a long time to work. And so effectiveness is something that is slow and even contested at times. What is important to me in the immediate imposition of sanctions is the side of encouraging the democratic movement. And there is no doubt that that has an immediate impact. People in Myanmar feel supported in their resistance to the military. They feel in so many ways that the international system has let them down. And so the imposition of sanctions is at least something that they can point to that is an expression of international concern for what is happening in Myanmar. So at the level of the symbolic, I would say that they are effective and immediately effective. But in terms of achieving our main objective of cutting the cash to the military, that is longer and slower. And it's compromised by the fact that only 41 countries out of 193 have formally imposed sanctions. They ought to be imposed by the Security Council. The Security Council is perhaps the most dysfunctional organ in the international system, and it is in breach of its responsibilities under the United Nations Charter, its responsibilities for international peace and security. This seems to have no effect on the Security Council whatsoever. Sanctions would be far more effective if they were imposed by the Security Council and then enforced. They would then be binding upon all 193 member states of the United Nations, and we could expect to see effectiveness more quickly. But that hasn't been possible to date.
Thank you. I know that our colleague Nitipon Piwmow wants to ask questions, and let me also hereby hand over the chair to Charles. And before I do that, and before I give the floor to Nitipon, I'd just like to tell that If there are members of the media who wish to receive comment from or interview members of the International Parliamentary Inquiry, they are very welcome to contact the IPI Secretariat by email. And I'll just give you the address. It's ipi@aseanmp.org. So now over to Nitipon and then further to Charles. So I thank Tom and Christopher for this very insightful hearing for my part, and you will still have a third witness, and look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday. So thank you, bye-bye.
Thank you.
So can I ask a question now? All right, thank you so much, Heidi, and thank you so much for Christopher for your presentation. My question, just like, I mean, I asking this question because I was so angry on my Thailand Prime Minister, because I mean, a few days ago, and Myanmar's military aircraft that fly over Thailand territory, and my leader just did nothing. So my question is, I mean, possible for Thai people or any like ASEAN members to open this case into universal jurisdiction, or there is anything that Thai people can do, to react to the Myanmar military. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Thai people certainly have economic power in their hands. In the absence of actions by governments, people can and do act, and they can impose people's boycotts on goods coming out of Myanmar that are produced by military-owned or backed companies, and they can refuse to have any relationships with military-owned or backed companies. There is a lot of Thai investment in Myanmar, and the Thai power companies, oil and gas companies, have been moving in as Western and US companies have withdrawn from Myanmar. So there are economic actions that individual people in Thailand and Thai businesses can take in the absence of action by the Thai government itself. And we've seen that in Australia. Our former government did not impose any sanctions whatsoever on Myanmar after the coup began on February 21. But many Australian businesses have decided to withdraw from Myanmar, to move away from their engagement with the military, even though the government itself did not impose sanctions. But of course, now we have a new government in Australia, and the new government has indicated that it's prepared to look at sanctions. And so change may come in my country. And I hope it's also possible to come in the policies of government in yours.
Thanks, Chris, for the answer. Can I have a follow-up question, Nitipon?
Yeah, just a bit
Go
more.
ahead.
Because I would say that most of the big businesses in Thailand, they support our Thai Prime Minister. So, I mean, for like normal people, what can we do?
Well, in that area, I would say individual consumer boycotts of goods that are produced by the Myanmar military. There has been mapping of products that are produced by the military and exported by the military. I would target that area. It puts power into the hands of people in Thailand to take action themselves. One difficulty is, though, as I say, the military is mainly involved in rent-seeking activity rather than productive activity. And so it's a fairly limited supply of goods that are actually produced by military joint ventures.
Thanks, Chris. I'll ask a follow-up question. It was interesting that you kind of more or less confirm the perception that Singapore and Hong Kong could be possible centers where the money is being kept. My question is the following. The United States has come out with a number of resolutions and policy changes vis-a-vis of the movement of money, especially involving the military, the Myanmar military. Would it be possible, I'm just thinking aloud and I'd like to get your response, that some of those resolutions could be brought to bear on Singapore and Hong Kong, meaning that the money is being parked in Singapore, but that's Myanmar junta money, and therefore Singapore or Hong Kong could be in violation of some US, resolution or agreement or something, or law itself. And given that Singapore is considered the marshal or the marshal of US in this part of the world, so would that be, I just want to get your response.
Sure. Charles, there is no doubt that US law could do that. Whether the law currently does that, I don't know. But US law was very effective in searching out the money in relation to Iran and Iraq and North Korea. The sanctions regimes were very intrusive into the affairs of other states and particularly banks in other states. So it can be done. It depends upon the will to do it.
Okay. That's a good one, though, because I think 2-3 months ago, there was a high-level finance team that came from the US to visit the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And I was just wondering what was the purpose of that visit. And from the grapevine, I heard it was something to do with Myanmar money parked in Singapore. So I'm just, that's what I heard. So anyway, I think.
Yeah. I was aware of the visit, but like you, I could find no information about what its purpose was.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Yep, Charles, can I?
Ibu? Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Christopher, for your sharing. Back to your explanation before related with the democracy, how to increase the democracy system in Myanmar. But in this situation, I think it's very hard. It's the biggest problem until now in Myanmar, because all the pillars of democracy, I think it's disrupted by the military junta. First, I want to get your insight related with the legitimacy of the NUG. What do you think about the legitimacy situation of the military junta and for the NUG? Or you have another opinion related with the legitimacy governments to be ruled for the Myanmar for now and the future. The second is related with the impunity problems in Myanmar now, because as we know that the generals rarely travel abroad, so why would they be concerned about the international justice efforts in terms of the impunity situations, because this is they what we call it, they think it is the best right for them to do anything in under the dictatorship umbrella, so they can do many things, and that no international instrument can touch them. What you can give the solution for the impunity situation, impunity problem, especially for the military junta? The third is related with, is there anything concrete Asian member states can be doing to address the issue of impunity, especially for the impunity, because Myanmar is our neighborhood. What do you think about the next chairmanship, Indonesian chairmanship of ASEAN? What do you think about to address the issue of impunity for the Myanmar? Thank you.
Chris?
Thanks very much. Let me deal with the impunity first. Yes, it's true that the generals don't travel very much. But that issue was directly connected to your last part about what ASEAN states can do, because the one place where the generals do like to travel is to ASEAN countries. They really like that. And they've traveled a lot to ASEAN countries. So there is a direct link here between the generals' travel and impunity. And what can ASEAN countries do? They can ratify the Rome Statute and become members of the International Criminal Court. And then they can enforce the arrest warrants of the court if and when the court issues arrest warrants for the Myanmar generals, and I think it will. I think the court will do that in time. At the moment, the opportunities for travel, even to ASEAN, are very restricted for the chief dictator and his deputy. And that's good. That's as it should be. But they must be getting sick, though, of being walled up inside Myanmar and not able even to go to Jakarta or to Singapore. And that's good. I mean, let them feel as though they're in a prison, even if it is a prison the size of a country. But ASEAN has got responsibilities here. The ratifications of the Rome Statute have been very low in ASEAN countries, and that needs to change. If we are serious about ending impunity for human rights atrocities, then states need to be ratifying the Rome Statute and cooperating fully with the International Criminal Court. And that's what I say first and foremost, ASEAN states need to do. Indonesia's leadership of ASEAN next year is going to be very important. Indonesia could not be taking over the chair of ASEAN at a more important time. If the generals go ahead with their proposed election next year, then there will be a challenge for ASEAN and the international system generally in responding to that. An election conducted by the generals under their law will not be a free and fair election. And it certainly will not negate the results of the last election that were validly conducted under the Constitution and the electoral law of Myanmar. But next year is going to be another critical year, and certainly we international human rights activists look very much to Indonesia's leadership of ASEAN next year. Reverting now to your first question about the NUG. The National Unity Government is certainly the most legitimate claimant to government in Myanmar today, and its legitimacy is well founded in the Myanmar Constitution and the electoral law, and particularly so under the circumstances of the last year and a half. An election was conducted in November 2020. It was considered by domestic and international observers to be a free and fair election. The parliament was elected and the military prevented the parliament from sitting. But parliamentarians constituting themselves as the committee representing the Pyondosu Hutto appointed the National Unity Government, as the parliamentarians were entitled to do under the Constitution. And that government has been acting as the executive in Myanmar, appointed by the members of the parliament in accordance with the Constitution. So I don't think there can be any doubt about the legal legitimacy of the National Unity Government. The military's claim, however, is entirely spurious. The declaration of the state of emergency was not carried out in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. The transfer of powers to the Commander-in-Chief was not made in accordance with the Constitution. And so both of those actions, which are the founding purportedly legal actions that established the military junta, were valid, void, and of no effect. So the junta has no legitimacy in law whatsoever, and the National Unity Government has a very strong basis in law to claim the right to be the legitimate government and recognised as the legitimate government of Myanmar. But even at the de facto level, the National Unity Government should be recognised. You know, I've seen reference to, including in UN documents at times, reference to the junta as the de facto authority or the de facto government. And I have no idea of the factual basis for this claim. The military is not in effective control of the country. In fact, the military has never controlled less of Myanmar than it does today. It's always struggled to control the ethnic nationality areas, but today it's struggling to control the central Burma homeland as well, the heartland of the country. The most it can say is that it controls the capital, Naypyidaw, and Yangon Airport. And is that the basis for a claim of de facto government? Not at all. The National Unity Government, by contrast, which is supported by so many of the ethnic nationality organisations, and those organisations control so many of the ethnic states, the NUG and its allies have effective control of far more of Myanmar than the military does. And in those areas, administrations have been conducted, ordinary government services such as schools and hospitals and healthcare, even police forces and courts are operating. So at the level of de facto legitimacy, the NUG wins hands down as well. But real legal legitimacy, de jure legitimacy, it can only be vested in the National Unity Government.
Thanks, Chris, for the reflections. Are there any last questions for Chris? If there are no questions, can I ask you the last question? My question goes back to the same question I asked Tom Andrews earlier. Should we start preempting the possible elections next year in Myanmar?
Preempting in the sense of indicating the unacceptability of elections next year, yes, because it is unacceptable. I cannot see any way in which the military junta will be capable of running a free democratic election in Myanmar for the establishment of a new parliament. Sure. And to do so while there is an existing parliament whose term has not run would also be illegal under the constitution of Myanmar.
The reason I raised that is because the Myanmar junta has already said they will have an elections next year, as opposed to all of us making noise the day before the elections have been called. It's time that we give them enough notice now itself. You can do whatever you want, but the international community is not going to accept it. Exactly. And I think most importantly, ASEAN should come up with a statement, maybe in the next 2 months meeting, the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting, including heads of government, where they review the 5-point plan, where they should actually say no elections will be accepted in Myanmar next year, something like that. I think that's something we need to be calling for.
I agree with you 100%. No valid election can be held next year, and certainly no free and fair election can be held under the military junta in Myanmar. Simply impossible, and that needs to be said clearly and unequivocally now.
I think we should do that now. Maybe that's one of the things that we need to flag up in the inquiry. Chris, we need to stop here now.
Thanks,
but you're a man of so much. Hold on, you're a man of so much wealth of knowledge about Myanmar. So if you have anything to submit to us in writing, please feel free to send as much information as possible. And thanks for the great work that you do, that you've done for the last so many years. Congratulations, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's nice to see you again, Charles, and to meet your colleagues.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.